You just heard that, Jeff and I have worked together for a while. It's been a privilege for me to have the opportunity to work with someone who's as dynamic and as talented as Jeff is, and who has a commitment. I feel like I'm working for him now rather than, I'm trying to work with him to help him with the OCD piece. So we've done a lot of things together, and from the beginning, he was someone who was always willing to tell his story. It's so important, I think, for people who have mental illness. As he talked about, one of the biggest problems we have is early recognition and people coming to treatment. So getting over the stigma and being in a position where you can talk openly about these things, which is really the mission of Peace Love, is absolutely critical, and I can't say enough about what Jeff has done. He's been on NBC News for us. He's been on the Discovery Channel. These are all things that have brought hundreds and thousands of people into treatment. And I want to talk a little bit about some of the work that we're currently doing and how we're rethinking mental illness from what we might have thought 15 or 20 years ago. When I first started working in obsessive-compulsive disorder, now that was in 1977 actually, the major figure in the field was flying people in by helicopter to the NIH to try to study them because they thought it was an extremely rare condition, not knowing there were 40,000 people with OCD in the Washington area alone. So we went on 2020. I can remember a couple of the patients we put on 2020 in the mid-'80s, 20,000 phone calls after that from people saying, oh my God, you mean someone else has what I have, and you mean there's a treatment for it. And I think that's what Jeff is all about. It's still incredibly important. So I think that one of the problems that we have in the field of mental illness is we treat it differently than other types of physical illness. So when you have chest pain, everybody really has a feel for what you do to get evaluated for that. You develop the symptom, you go to the ER, they take your blood pressure, they draw some blood, they get a cardiogram. There are tests that can be done to try to determine whether or not you've had a heart attack or not. And the diagnosis then becomes clear. It's based on biologic measures that you can get either from the electrical activity of the heart or from the bloodstream. And the treatment, therefore, is based on what you get out of those diagnostic tests. So, and there's been a lot of developments in treatments over the last 20 years, all the way from being able to put thin wires into the heart and stents into the heart, to surgical procedures, to trying to be able to prevent heart attacks early through the use of statins and through controlling blood pressure. But unfortunately, the story for mental illness is different than the one for coronary heart disease. And here you see, back in the 50s to the 70s, that we had really no impact on the morbidity of cardiac illness. And yet, if the rise had continued, we would have been at 1.8 million deaths due to stroke and to heart attack. But in fact, what's happened is that we're seeing that over the course from 1972 out to 2006, a dramatic drop in the morbidity associated to this through improvements. And this, in fact, is the hope for mental illness over the course of the next 20 or 30 years. So, unlike chest pain, we diagnose by clinical observation. We don't have any real lab tests yet. And unfortunately, instead of people, when they have chest pain, they go to the ER. When someone has a problem with obsessive-compulsive disorder, oftentimes they never make it to a doctor. And if they make it to a doctor, they don't tell them about the symptoms. We have no idea what causes these disorders at this point. And the preventative strategies have not been as well developed as they could be. And the treatment at this point, unfortunately, I wouldn't say that's true for OCD, but for many of those other major mental illnesses that we deal with, like schizophrenia, it's try one drug. If it doesn't work, try another drug, and the drugs are far from optimal. No cures, no vaccines for mental illness at this point. So, and if you look at the burden of illness across all the conditions, and this is a question for us where, you know, how much is the government funding mental illness? It's really quite striking because as you can see for neuropsychiatric disorders, the burden of disease is much higher than that for either cardiovascular disease or cancer. And yet the amount of money that's been spending at the NIH is disproportionately small. There's over 36,000 suicides in the US per year. It's the leading cause of death now in adolescent males. 90% of these suicides occur in people who have mental illness. And just as a context, 17,000 die of homicides across the US. There's 34,000 traffic fatalities. So 36,000 suicides. So the impact is truly major. And the life expectancy for people with mental illness, due to a variety of comorbid conditions, is 8 years less. The economic burden in terms of disability, same thing, incredibly high. And so you can ask the question of why it is that it's taken so long. Why is it so slow? You know, why hasn't the government addressed the problem with more resources? And part of the issue for us is the fact that the brain, as Woody Allen said, his second favorite organ, is among the most complex of all the organs. And when you think about it, over 10 billion nerve cells, which are the things that communicate and allow us to talk, to reach, to do whatever we do in terms of behavior, and somewhere in the neighborhood of 2 trillion wires that connect those nerve cells. So that's the complexity of the system and the difficulty of really being able to study it adequately that I think has delayed our ability to develop biomarkers and develop new treatments. But fortunately, there's been incredible advances in our ability to study how the brain works. Actually, Brown is really at the forefront of some of this work that's been going on. And I think that you're going to see in the next 2 decades the same sort of success that we have seen in heart disease and in beginning in cancer. We have incredible new instruments to begin to understanding the wiring diagram in the living human brain. We're making progress on the genetic front.
The probe that is placed into the brain, I understand, comes level with the top of the nose and the ear. And it is connected to a battery in my chest, on the skin in my chest here. And this is controlled. I can control the amount of the voltage going in. I can control the length of time that the pulse is. And I can identify the number of times per second that it goes in. And I'll turn myself off now. So one of the problems, not only as you can appreciate, is that you can't do very much for yourself. Like personal hygiene has to be necessary. But because my concentration now is up to 90% of my tremor and trying to control it, and I'm thinking the word Parkinson's all the time, I'm not terribly, I'm not concentrating on my conversation with you at all. Okay. You can see that it's quite...
Work is going on currently in depression, in PTSD, and in OCD. Here at Brown, we have been working in a area that involves a particular structure in the brain called the anterior limb of the internal capsule, using an instrument called a gamma knife. And the gamma knife is not a knife at all. It's a radiosurgical procedure that works on the principle of a laser or a magnifying glass, where you can focus a beam of energy on an extremely small point in the brain with 1 millimeter accuracy and affect a particular circuit that's thought to be involved in one of these disorders.
It was devastating. You know, we had a lot of expectations for Todd, as you do for your children, and to see that all just stop was very devastating.
Todd was the type of kid, if he was first in lunch line, you didn't want to get behind him. I mean, he'd be 10 minutes on the banana pie and 10 minutes on whether he wanted a roll or whether he wanted a carrot. You wanted to be in front of him and not behind him.
Each motor action was actually sequenced into a number of different movements, things that we do mostly automatically, so that it would take him hours to do what would, for the most part, we can do in seconds.
A few short years ago, there was little joy. Todd Isaacson was mentally ill, depressed, virtually immobilized by one of the worst cases of obsessive-compulsive disorder doctors had ever seen.
He couldn't talk. He could not perform any of the daily functions that most of us would see as routine. It would take him an hour to get from one place to another that would take most of us 10 seconds.
This home video, shot by Todd's parents, Ken and Alberta Isaacson, which shows a teenage Todd spending 45 minutes just to tie his shoes. Todd's distraught parents fruitlessly sought help from doctors and therapists in Nebraska and across the country. Doctors who finally urged Ken and Alberta to institutionalize their son.
They told us that we may just as well make him a ward of the state and put him in an institution, because they didn't think he would ever get well.
Once you got to know Todd, he was someone who you really wanted to try to make better. Wonderful family. He had grown up, had all kinds of talents before he was severely impaired by this OCD. It was like a person who was locked up or imprisoned by this terrible disorder, and it was just an opportunity to try to get him out of it.
Todd would become the first patient in the United States to be treated for obsessive-compulsive disorder through a technologically advanced neurosurgical procedure called the gamma knife. Todd's 2 non-invasive brain surgeries took place here at the New England Gamma Knife Center in Providence, and they produced dramatic results.
After the second procedure, gradually the symptoms started to diminish, and he was able to cope with behavior therapy with Rich, and he was also able to break many of his old habits that had sort of cornered him and made his life practically unbearable.
Staff members from all departments, from meal preparation to maintenance, took note of Todd's slow, deliberate movements and sweet nature early on, and soon found themselves cheering him down the long road to recovery. The young man for whom taking off and putting on shoes was slow torture now completes that same task with ease.
We feel that we've lost out on a lot. Never had the chance to really play ball or, take the kids to soccer or things like that. But I think now, we'll put that behind us. Now's the chance to go forward. For people that may see this video and for them to understand what took place before and to see where Todd is now, being able to function, just to eat on time, just to get out of bed in the morning and do things and have something positive to look forward to during the day. That's a whole new world.
Nothing worth working for is necessarily easy, but if you stick with it and never give up, I think you can always make your dreams come true.
Go get him, Todd. People who have mental illness, it is a constant source of amazement to me, their resilience and their ability to be able to help others who have some of the same things that people who don't have mental illness fail to recognize how it affects your daily life. And I think for someone like Jeff, who has been through more than most of you can imagine, to have done what he has done already and what he is out to try to do on a national level. It's incredible to me. It's been a privilege for me to work with him and to see what he's accomplished in the service of others. So I just want to thank Jeff and give him a round of applause. And I'm probably over time.